two aspects of adjustment or not, or standardization of global performance management. First, upstream, why this global standardization, and then in the following, downstream, to what extent companies need to localize performance management. So the basic question is, I think as I put it before already, to balance global integration versus local responsiveness, because we have these two competing objectives, and how to reconcile them also here in performance management. In this section here, we mainly focus on how to achieve global integration, so global standardization, or why we need that. So here first, to give an overview of this conflict. We have upstream considerations, or global standardization, and then downstream on the other hand. So in terms of global standardization, first to begin with, multinational corporations, they strive for strategic integration and coordination, particularly so if they pursue a global strategy. One world best practice, and that will be rolled out everywhere. But even if not, there's some kind of strategic alignment that performance management should achieve. Second point would, in general, workforce alignment, that people form one unit. And third one, also because of organizational learning and knowledge management. We talked about some of the key functions of HR. And international HR in particular would be development of global leadership and global units, and knowledge management, knowledge sharing. We're living in a knowledge-based economy, so that would be extremely important. And to benefit from knowledge in different country contexts, transfer it, we need to achieve also this somewhat coordinated knowledge management system. And then on the other hand, we have various downstream considerations why localization is needed. We'll talk more that in the next section, such as responsiveness to local conditions, because there are differences, regulatory and all sorts of. The second one, in particular, cultural difference. That's why we also had a dedicated session on cultural background, cross-cultural management, and so forth. And then also establishing the management relationships between individuals, particularly if these individuals from different countries, how to manage that. And then training to transfer then, or to localize. So let us talk first about strategic integration and coordination. So multinational corporation has certain objectives, certain goals, has a vision, a strategy. And then it's important to align that also then with the employees. And that becomes then very tricky when we have the overarching multinational corporation, we have the headquarters, and then we have the various subsidiaries below. How to coordinate these different units. In some cases, if it's an organization which is very decentralized, maybe pursuing a multi-domestic strategy, we don't need so much alignment and strategic integration. Maybe some local units pursue different objectives. But even then, there might be same product, service that need to be transferred and sold in various units. Then there needs to be some kind of alignment. The case is very different if you have a global strategy, transnational strategy. It needs to be highly integrated. And then it's very important to standardize and coordinate certain key functions when we think of performance management. It sounds super basic, but there needs to be alignment. What is performance? This sounds very basic. In this classroom, performance in this classroom would be what grade you get in your final exam. It's fairly simple. It's standardized here. In a company, what constitutes performance can differ. What people understand or what is performance. And we also conducted surveys, different managers. What is performance for your company? What do American managers usually say? What is performance? What performance they desire? What do American managers want to achieve? Profitability. That's one. And even more important, shareholder price. share prices, shareholder value. It's about shareholder value. What is a typical goal of Japanese management? Job security, employment relationships. Or for Korean companies, what is important to them? Growth, sales growth, gaining size. So they're very different objectives. What do managers strive for? What are their goals? What is performance? Very, very basic. But for a company, just imagine you have a subsidiary in America and they only want shareholder value and profitability, whereas the other subsidiary, they only want to secure jobs. And there are different competing understandings of what performance is. And from a corporate perspective, it's very clear. The headquarters, the top management, they have certain performance ideas, objectives, performance goals. And typically, you would like to standardize them. Because in the US, in order to achieve performance, profitability, you have to lay off people, which contradicts maybe the objectives or the performance understanding of the top management in Japan. And here, of course, you would say then the overall corporate objectives, they supersede then maybe local understandings or interpretations. In that regard, you would globally standardize what performance means and what you aim for. Sounds super simple, but still that's important to instill this. And that's what companies usually do, standardize their main performance criteria. What is performance? What do we want to achieve? And that relates also then to performance goal setting and so forth. Very clearly, that typically almost all companies really emphasize that aspect. Performance. Another aspect also performance management. The performance management cycle. Very often there's some kind of global standardization. It's also important when you think about leadership development. You want to develop a global company, global leaders. It may take 20 years from bottom to top to become a global leader. And along this process, you have performance management. And very often, these potential global leaders, they will relocate. We talked about this before, about training development. Many large global companies, they will offer managers expatriation assignment. Also, it's important so they understand how this company works and how it operates in different countries. So you understand this whole company and not just one single unit. How can you become a manager of a company that operates in 90 countries, there's only 10% in your home market, but 90% elsewhere? So you need to get this understanding. When these people then transfer, and it's a long-term plan and development, you need also to find some ways how to evaluate them over time, also in different countries. But when these managers then work in a different country, in America, in Poland, and then suddenly they have a completely different performance management system in place. In one country, they say, oh yeah, family, relationships is all very important. And the others say, oh, it's only profitability and so forth. You have different standards. You also need a somewhat standardized performance management system. Only that way you can really promote and develop people from different countries and really to the top of your organization. So very often performance management, this whole cycle, there's some kind of standardization globally. Because how can you otherwise compare a Spanish, a German, a Greek, a Chinese, American manager if you have completely different criteria? You need some certain similarity in the process and in the criteria in order really to develop people from the bottom in many different countries, and also when you relocate people. So that is really important and really to consider somewhat a unified. It doesn't need to be completely the same, but some kind of similarities. How else can you compare then if you use completely different standards and ways of evaluation? So that is extremely important and where we need global standardization. Maybe if you have a completely ethnocentric management, only American managers can lead the American company. Anyway, you only look at your American peers and you don't care what happens in other countries. Yeah, but otherwise, there's always some kind of global standardization in what is performance and what is performance management, and relate also relevant performance expectations. So there, typically, organizations, they strive for some global standardization. One way also to achieve strategic integration and coordination would be related to virtual teams. Yeah, global virtual teams, they follow many purposes, very often knowledge creation, innovation, new products, new services, but also for strategic integration and coordination. Yeah, so there can be frequent interactions. We also have lots of expatriation assignments, short and long term, but they can also be very much complemented by these global virtual team meetings. Yeah, we will really discuss what's going on, also in terms of performance management, not the evaluation itself, but very often ways of feedback, discussing new corporate policies, things that needs to be done, yeah, but also maybe to achieving team objectives, team project, and so forth. Yeah, so global virtual teams have very important functions. Yeah, in general, also for strategic integration and coordination. Okay, so far about that. So the next point now is about workforce alignment. Yeah, that's also very important that we have strategic alignment. Yeah, or some people also say this shared vision, shared understanding, yeah, or common performance direction across different business units. And that can be really a strong competitive advantage, because if it's really instilled in employees, you don't need formal control mechanisms because you have alignment. Everyone is going in the same direction, so there is some kind of mental programming. Yeah, that people don't need directions and instructions each time, but they can also act on their own because they already have this kind of mental programming. Yeah, and again here, basic things such as common language are no-brainers. So that's also nowadays why it's so important that so many companies that do not use English as their corporate language use English as a corporate language. Maybe it could also be another corporate language if that is commonly used in other countries, but somehow it seems to be English. It could be also Spanish in some Spanish companies that do lots of business in South America, yeah, but some kind of shared language. To achieve this kind of workforce alignment, there are different ways what can be done. So in general, what we have here would be development of global leaders. They will be drawn from many different countries. That's also the idea. We have same performance standards, expectations, and so forth, same language. They will be drawn and then also pooled and developed for greater good, to pursue corporate objectives. And then it's also important to implement congruent performance expectations and performance management that all leads then to developing of strategic objectives. And more specifically, we can think of different HR functions that can support these processes. Yeah, we think of training, development, there can be workshops, understanding of what is the organizational culture and so forth, frequent communication, maybe also very often from the CEO, from the top manager, can be video messages and so forth, but also other forms of interactions, network events, and so forth. And that will be also tied then to the compensation system. Yeah, because the idea is to really then also develop these global leaders, who have this shared common values. And at the same time, there may be some kind of local adaptations where necessary. We'll talk more about that in the next section. Yeah, then also to trying to achieve that. Then let us also talk about organizational learning and knowledge management. Yeah, the idea is really to accumulate knowledge, and there are different ways. These feedback performance management systems are one good way of achieving that. And there's also very relevant would be these global virtual teams, that not only local knowledge will be stored and learned and so forth locally, but also transferred to different subsidiaries, different units, that we have this ongoing feedback, knowledge sharing across different units. I think very critical is maybe also this aspect, learning from mistakes. That's something that's a very delicate issue, because very often if managers commit mistakes, they try to bury and to cover up mistakes. We have seen some huge scandals here also in Germany, the Volkswagen diesel scandal, very prominent one, and that's maybe one of the most, sadly, one of the most prominent cases in corporate world during the past couple of years. And that could have been prevented much earlier on. But there was not this policy or somehow the culture really to address these issues. And I think that's really important, not only to celebrate victories and new innovations, which are important and which should be utilized and leveraged, but also learning from mistakes. And this is particularly relevant for international business, because very often foreign companies go abroad, they enter one market, and they may fail. This is very common because it's challenging to enter a foreign market, but then it would be very beneficial if really companies then try to analyze the reasons for their mistakes when entering one market, so they can avoid the same mistakes next time when they enter another market. So there are some companies that have been extremely successful entering one market, the next market, and the other one, but at the same time there are also quite a few other companies who have been failing in one market, and they made similar mistakes again when they enter the next market. Walmart, very successful American retail company, and they entered many different countries. Fail, again fail, many failures in many different countries, which maybe could have been avoided also if they have systematically analyzed their mistakes from their earlier failed overseas expansion plans. And then it would be also important then really to trying to systematically organize this. There are some companies that have really sophisticated knowledge databases. A knowledge database where they can try to codify knowledge they acquired, and also maybe sometimes even more importantly, where they register the people who have been in charge of these different projects. Because very often you can codify only to some extent some knowledge, but then you know who has the knowledge, who owns the knowledge, and then these people can also be then consulted or being transferred, then to transfer that knowledge to different units. Then there are different mechanisms, depending also on the level of employees. So if you think of large multinational corporations, to facilitate some knowledge and feedback, at lower level, what typically companies do is they run some surveys. Conduct large surveys on lower level managers to understand what's going on there, or also gain some insights. And higher levels then probably surveys is not the typical means of obtaining knowledge information. So typically you would rather engage in some kind of more interpersonal interactions. So meaning you would communicate directly from senior manager to manager, to really trying to extract that information, or then also manager who would then transfer that knowledge to subordinates in the next unit. So the idea very often would be then, if you think of expatriates, one senior expatriate goes to a foreign country, goes to, let's say, to Colombia, is highly active in sales and other activities, and then being placed back in the headquarters, or maybe even in another Southern American country, to implement that knowledge. Implement meaning also to downward, and by teaching, directing, instructing then employees, and then there's all kinds of spillover effects. Another mechanism, again, if you think of failure, would be also critical incidents, that again, based on critical incidents, trying to learn from that, and then also feedback to other constituencies in management positions and also lower levels, so anyone who could be affected in the future.